Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon for our weekly webinar. We run weekly webinars during lockdown. So this week's webinar, as you can see, is going to be about conditional access in Microsoft 365. So please submit any questions throughout using the Q&A button that you should see either at the top or the bottom. And we will also send a recording of the webinar along with these slides out afterwards. So just a little bit about me. My name's James Rood. I'm the internal technical consultant at Complete IT. I've been working here for, well, 10.5 years now, almost, even though I can't believe that myself. And I implemented conditional access for Complete IT as well. So first things first, if you've never heard of it, what is conditional access? So it's a way of securing access to Azure AD app-based applications. So this is primarily Microsoft 365 because that's all based on Azure AD in the background. But you can actually extend that to any application that can integrate with Azure AD. And for the technically minded of you out there, that's any SAML-based application you can use conditional access with. So it secures access by defining who can access an application, what or how it can access that application, and where, more where from can it access the application. So why is this important? Well, in this day and age, we're becoming ever more dependent on the cloud. More and more industries are moving various operations to the cloud, and cloud platforms are just growing every day. So you've got things like Microsoft 365 is obviously the big one that a lot of people know about, most people know about now. But you've also got Sage have an online platform, Google with G Suite, Dropbox is all in the cloud, Box, similar concept, GitHub for code repositories, DigitalOcean, Microsoft Azure, all of these things are all cloud-based. And if you go onto any of their websites for their sort of sales pages for these, there's two things that are always consistent on any cloud platform, and that it's highly available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and that you can access them from anywhere because it's not just a server sat in your cupboard anymore that you have to go to the office to access, or you have to VPN in. You can access it from any device anywhere in the world, which is great. It's really useful. It enhances productivity to no end. The issue with that is it's also accessible from anywhere for anyone, not just users in your business. So a username and a password has become ever more precious, hence things like 2FA also coming into the equation. So that's why we need to take a multi-layered approach to securing these platforms. So you've got things like your complex passwords. I think gone are the days where your password is just the name of your dog, which you've most likely got on Facebook somewhere, and it's probably very easy for someone to find. So if you're not using complex passwords, it's highly recommended that you do. 2FA becoming the norm, or MFA, which is one in the same. A lot of platforms are either forcing you to use this now, or they're highly recommending it because it just adds that extra layer of protection over just your username and password. And then conditional access can help and complement the previous two by adding device and geo restrictions and various other functionality on top of these protections. So I'm going to go through some use cases just to give you some idea of how you would use it in the real world. So say you're a UK only business, and you can probably see where I'm going with this one. You're in the UK, you might deal with occasional foreign foreign businesses, but your staff are all UK based. There's no one that should be accessing Microsoft 365 from outside of the UK, unless you've got a very busy CEO that is on holiday in Spain and just really wants to log in. Now, this is really simple to fix that flaw with conditional access, because what you might have is everyone's logging in from the UK, but with Microsoft 365, that doesn't know that. Anyone can log in from anywhere. Anyone can log in from Asia, America, Africa. But you know that 99.99% of the time, everyone will be in the UK. So why are you going to allow everyone to log in from anywhere in the world? It's quite a big security flaw, essentially. So with conditional access, and I will decipher this screen a bit here, it's essentially saying that access to Exchange Online is limited to only include the United Kingdom. And with that, we've pretty much plugged a very, very large hole for access into our organization. Now, that's not just Exchange Online. You can apply that to all of Office 365, or Microsoft 365 as they're now calling it. So it's not just protecting access to your emails, it's protecting access to all your SharePoint data, your Teams data, everything within Office 365. Or like I said earlier, any Azure AD based application you can protect with conditional access, just like this. Another use case, mobile phones, smartphones, more importantly. They've been around for 13 years now, at least, if you'd believe it, in the case of an iPhone anyway. Now, one issue here is that anyone can sync work emails to their phones, anyone at all. But by default, anyone can just go onto their phone, enter their username and password, and synchronize all of their emails onto their phone, which is handy. But at the same time, you don't know how protected that phone is. They might not have a password on it. They might be someone who's extremely prone to leaving it behind in the coffee shop when these coffee shops open again. And you just don't know what data is on that phone, and you've got no way of protecting it. So conditional access can help in a couple of ways with this. You can be quite brute forceful, if that's a word. And in this example, we could say, okay, Exchange Online, anything running Android or iOS, block. That means you can, or God forbid, Windows Phone, if anyone's still using Windows Phone, block the connection, because I don't want anyone running one of those operating systems from accessing Exchange Online. Now, you can go a bit more granular with that. If you use Microsoft Intune, conditional access works really well and integrates well, I should say, with Microsoft Intune. And you could say, I want it to be marked as compliant. So I don't mind what operating system it's running, as long as the device is compliant. Now, what that means is you can set a policy within Microsoft Intune to say, right, for a device to be marked as compliant, it must have a PIN code. It must time its screen out and lock itself after 1 minute of inactivity. It must not be jailbroken. It must be encrypted. And you can then say, well, if someone tries to set up email on an iOS device, it will then prompt and say, right, you need to install the Microsoft Intune app so we can scan the device and make sure it's compliant and bring it under your organizational policy for what compliance is. Then and only then, you can then sync emails to that device. And then one more example that I'll just use is your office is a trusted location, but you most likely have a lot of remote workers, especially nowadays, you most likely have a lot of remote workers. Now, With 2FA or MFA, the biggest bugbear for a lot of people is it's another annoyance. When I try and log in, I have to get my phone out and I have to type in a 6-digit code, or I have to pick up the phone and press hash, or a lot of users just see it as another annoyance as opposed to the benefits it brings to security. But you could use conditional access to say, well, my office is a trusted place. So why would I need people to do 2FA when they're in the office? I only want it when they're outside of the office. So with conditional access, you can do that. So you could say, right, Exchange Online, again, I'll use that example. I want you to require multi-factor authentication to access it. Except, so you can see it's on exclude there, except for these locations. And you can have as many locations as you want. So that's all based on IP address. So your office will have one or some IP addresses associated with the internet line there. So if you have multiple offices, you just put in the IP addresses of all the internet lines there. You can say, right, these locations are safe. You do not need to keep prompting users to grab their phone and pick up the phone and enter the 6-digit code when they try and log in. Now you can get very granular with this if you really wanted to. I've shown you some quite basic examples, but I'm sure you can imagine you can really tailor this to whatever your needs may be. You could say, well, if you're in the office, you still require multi-factor authentication, but it doesn't have to prompt every login, for example. But that's just an idea of the kind of use cases that you can use conditional access for and where it's useful to just help restrict essentially logins to your various platforms, and namely Microsoft 365, so that it's not just open to the entire world, whilst also using it to try and enhance the user experience a bit more. So I grabbed this slide back from the 2FA webinar I ran back in January, because I think it's really important to show the essentially determination of bad actors out there that are trying to log in to Azure AD, so Microsoft 365. So all of this data I pulled from Complete IT's own tenant. So I think at the time when I pulled this was back in January, we were around 175 staff. We are a UK-based business. We don't have, I think, no, that's a lie. We have one person who lives overseas. He lives in France. So we shouldn't expect any logins apart from that one user in France from outside of the UK unless someone's gone on holiday. In which case, what are you doing looking at your work emails? Is the question I would say. You should be relaxing. So between the 13th of January and the 20th of January, Complete IT had 4,769 failed logins from outside of the UK. And just to pick up some of the higher examples of a breakdown of where they came from, we had almost 2,000 of them from China. Now I can tell you now, we don't have anyone living and working in China. So that was just to show, I've left this in here just to show these are the kind of things we can protect with conditional access. Why on earth why would we have it open to the world, to 2,000 in a week, that is, remember, in 2,000 attempted logins from China, when we have no one working in China and we're never going to have someone going over to China to try and sign in? Rather than letting them fail, and God forbid, getting in, managing to break the password and get in and access all of our data and harvest it, why don't we just stop them from logging in entirely? And you can do that with conditional access. Oh, and that was Rachel Smith. I remember when I wrote this slide back in January, she popped up on the list of failed logins for Buenos Aires. Now, bearing in mind, we were sat in High Wycombe, and I looked out into the office, and she was sat right in front of me. I pretty much knew she wasn't logging in from Buenos Aires. So that was quite funny. So this is great and all, but what do you need to enable conditional access? So first of all, you need users in Azure AD. If you have Microsoft 365 or Office 365, you have that already. That's where they are. You might be syncing that on-prem, with your on-premises AD, or if you're in cloud only, they're all there in Azure AD already. You also need some specific licensing to do conditional access policies. So you need either Microsoft 365 Business Premium, or you need Office 365 Enterprise Mobility Suite E3, or Azure AD Premium P1. Any one of those will give you access to use conditional access. Now, not all organizations will have or want to subscribe to one of those plans. So Microsoft have introduced something called security defaults. So these are for organizations without conditional access. And it just shows Microsoft's committed to securing data, and more importantly, your data for your organization, because they include this as standard for any Office 365 plan, and even actually as part of the free Azure AD plan. And what it does, when you turn it on, it puts a couple of policies in place. So it requires that all users enable 2FA within Azure within 14 days of you turning it on. After 14 days, they will be forced to turn it on, and they have to use 2FA after that. It requires that users routinely provide 2FA as and when necessary. So either on like a weekly basis, or if they sign in from a new device, it will force them to use 2FA to sign in for the first time. It forces administrators to always perform 2FA, regardless of where they're logging in from or how often they've logged in from that device. It blocks legacy authentication protocols. So that's IMAP, SMTP, a couple of others in there. But essentially those old methods of authenticating with Office 365, they don't support 2FA. So security defaults will block those logins. So to give you an idea, 90% of Complete OT's failed logins from overseas were on SMTP. Now, we shouldn't have anyone authenticating on SMTP. So that's why Microsoft took the decision to use that as a method to just block outright. It also protects some privileged activities like accessing the Azure portal. It will force people to use 2FA. Now, as you can imagine, with that being free of charge and included, there are some caveats. So you can't use security defaults and conditional access at the same time. It's one or the other. So if you decide to go for security defaults now, because you don't want to subscribe to one of the paid plans to get conditional access, you would have to turn off security defaults and then build the same policies yourself in conditional access. Can be done. You can do everything that security defaults do with conditional access. You just have to build them out yourself. The most important bit, or one of the most important bits, you cannot selectively choose which defaults apply. They are either all on or they're all off. Now, the important bit with that is those legacy protocols that I mentioned, the IMAP and the SMTP. Yes, they are the biggest vector for people trying to brute force their way in because they don't support 2FA. Downside is a lot of scanners, especially older ones, when you do scan to email, they do it over SMTP. So if you have any scanners that are using SMTP to send emails to Office 365, you can't enable them because they're going to get blocked. Whereas if you had conditional access, you could turn everything on but the legacy protocols blocking. Or you could block legacy protocols, but not from your Office's IP address, for example. You can't do that with security defaults. You're also limited in the multi-factor authentication options to only using the mobile app. So that's the Microsoft Authenticator app for Android and iOS. You can only use the app with security defaults, whereas with conditional access, you can use text messages and phone calls, as well as a couple of other options. So you might have some users either without a smartphone, or they're not willing to put an app on their smartphone. That will pretty much write off your option for security defaults, because their only option to 2FA is through the app, and it will force them to 2FA. So I've gone through that reasonably quickly. There are some resources. So these are some links that I used to build this presentation. Don't worry about writing them down. We will, like I said earlier, we will be sending this PowerPoint out with the slide deck. Sorry, with the webinar recording, I should say. But we're now going to go into the Q&A. So if you haven't already, please fire over any questions you might have. Jess is going to join us back again now to read them out, and I'll do my best to answer them. So yeah, Jess, you there?
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, James. That was really good. I actually learned a lot then. So I've got a couple of questions in here. So as James said, keep them coming in. Got a few more minutes. If you have set access to UK only, can people easily request access?
So what will happen when they try and sign in, it will just come up with a message saying you're not allowed to sign in from where you're trying to sign in from. There's no button on that screen to request access, but it is very easy for someone to go in and add the location in. Another alternative, if you do have, if you know that there are some users that are frequently abroad, for example, you can selectively apply the conditional access policies on a user per user basis. So you could just exclude a particular user from the policy that's restricting everyone to the UK, for example. That might be another way. But it's not easy for the user to just click a button, request access, much like it is with like SharePoint files. But it is very easy to just add the location in. So it would just be a quick message over to whoever looks after the conditional access policy to say, I'm trying to log in and getting this message. Can you please unblock me? I'm coming in from Nigeria or something, wherever they may be.
Perfect, thank you. I think this has kind of been covered now, may have come in a bit earlier. Can you use conditional access on different countries? So I guess they mean, like you said, you can block just China or...
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So Azure has a very comprehensive list of countries, essentially, that allows you to pick and choose. You can do it one way or the other, for example. So to explain what I mean by that is, you could say only allow logins from the UK, or UK and France and Belgium. Or you could flip that on its head and say block access from China, Russia, and America.
Okay.
And allow everywhere else.
And can I set it so that my teams that are furloughed don't have access? Can I import a list? So I guess that means import a list of the email addresses of the teams that are furloughed, and just set that.
Not 100% on importing a list. You can very easily say, you can enter in the users into the policy and say these users block access, and even to these specific applications. So you might want them to get email, but you might not want them to log into Teams. So you could say, well, block them from accessing Teams, but allow them on email. So you could do that way. To go a bit more technical, there would always be a way of importing a list through PowerShell or something like that. But in terms of the web interface, I think you do just have to type the names in one by one.
Perfect. Do all users need to be on the same Microsoft plan to apply conditional access to the whole company?
Yes, I believe every user that needs to have a conditional access policy applied will need to be licensed for that plan.
Okay, who do I talk to get this set up?
Technical consultant or your account manager will be a good first port of call. They can
Also,
talk
just
through.
on that, I'll be sending the email out following this webinar to everyone that registered and attended today. So if you do want me to put you in contact with the right person, if you are a complete IT client, but perhaps are unsure who you would speak to, or you're not yet a complete IT client, just let me know, respond to the email, and I can make sure someone gets in contact with you and can talk you through that. And I think, unless we've got any more questions coming through, that's it today.
Brilliant stuff. Well, if anyone does come up with any other questions, feel free to email me at the address on screen. I'll happily bore you to tears. No, I'm joking. I'll happily respond to you and try and help any questions you may have. But otherwise, thank you for joining me. Have a great afternoon and take care.
Thank you so much, James.